What's up, everybody? What is going on? This is Fred Ricciani of TSC News. I have right here on the line a good friend of TSC News, actor, stuntman, combat sports analyst, and now the latest person to play the legendary character Marcus Phoenix in Gears of War. I'm talking about the Mauler, Paul Lazenby. Paul, how's it going?
Dude, I'm going to hire you to go into every room ahead of me and introduce me just like that.
Hey, I'd be happy to. I'll be your personal Bruce Buffer.
No, I don't. Be my personal Joe Martinez or my personal Don Andrews instead. That sounds better.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. Man, where to start? We're going to get to your excursion with Gears of War and all the kick-ass things you've been doing as of late, but let's talk a little bit about pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. First off, the pro wrestling front. TNA still looks like they could be canceled by September by Destination America. Ring of Honor seems like they're kind of, maybe not a time buy, so to speak, but they're just essentially selling their tape of their current show on Sinclair for cheap onto Destination America. They're doing decent. They really got nothing to lose and everything to gain. But now, just a couple days away, actually a day away at the time we're recording this from the Lame Duck TNA Slammiversary pay-per-view, we're on the heels of a possible angle with Jeff Jarrett and TNA. Or, better or worse yet, depending on who you ask, a potential takeover by Jeff Jarrett and his good friend Toby Keith. Paul, what do you make of all this TNA chaos?
None of it surprises me. I mean, anybody who's familiar with the history of TNA is going to know that that's pretty much par for the course. It has been a rudderless ship for a long time, and the only reason that it's still going is because Dixie Carter's got a father who doesn't mind pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars into his daughter's plaything. And I don't mean to sound excessively harsh, because I've heard by all accounts that Dixie Carter, who I've never met, is an extremely nice lady, and I'm not disputing that, but it just makes me sick that something that had so much potential has been so horribly mismanaged for so long. And I think that a guy who's as savvy as Jeff Jarrett could very conceivably, be smart enough to get all his ducks in a row, spend time building up his war chest, and then swoop in when the time is right and pick the bones and salvage from TNA what is left to be salvaged after all the dust settles.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Jeff Jarrett came on with Karen Jarrett wearing a Global Force Wrestling t-shirt, had a ton of Global Force Wrestling plugs. I think he had more plugs than Mick Foley does in an interview. It was crazy. And they cut this very passionate promo talking about participating in the King of the Mountain match, but at the same time kind of sort of maybe burying TNA. Just very, very bizarre. And we talked off the air about guys leaving a sinking ship, making sensible business decisions. We should note that as of right now, according to Dave Meltzer and Brian Fritz, guys like Magnus, Loki, and James Storm, who's been there from the beginning, are all out of TNA. Very interesting stuff. I know it's very unpredictable, Paul, but if you had to make a prediction by, say, September, October, where do you see TNA ending up? Do you see them on Destination America rebranded? Could you see them maybe if their contract expires at Destination America, perhaps being owned by Toby Keith and Jarrett and, I don't know, trying to sell themselves as a new brand, maybe to Spike TV?
Yeah, I think that would be the smartest move is to completely rebrand. I think the TNA name has just become synonymous with this kind of chaos and mismanagement. And I could see possibly Jeff Jarrett just culling the locker room and scooping up what talent he can for Global Force, maybe securing a television deal, making TNA GFW, and combining the two companies. I think he'd be smarter in that respect than, say, WWE was after the WCW acquisition, or NWA UWF, or New Japan and UWFI. Those are all cases where a competitor was scooped up and then Eagle Booking took over, and the newcomers were kind of buried in most cases. I think in this case, because Jarrett's got a brand new brand, and because TNA kind of has got to have a place in his heart. It was his baby to start. I think that would be a best case scenario in my eyes, is that it would just become the new GFW, and people like Austin Aries and Bobby Roode and I could go on and on, would get scooped up and become GFW stars.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the reason I brought up Spike TV is because I actually talked to some people I knew within Spike TV about this whole thing. And I don't know if you've been following the ratings lately, but the ratings for boxing, the ratings for Bellator outside of their big shows like Kimbo versus Shamrock haven't been doing so well. You know, when wrestling was on, granted, it didn't get the best ad rates, but TNA did serve as a great promotional vehicle for all this other programming. So I asked a couple people, and here's the answer I got. And I'm telling everybody this for the first time. I asked them, could you see Jarrett and Toby Keith taking over TNA and trying to pitch it to Spike? And they said, if it's Jeff and it's not that name, as in the TNA name, we might talk to them. But TNA is a dead brand to the wrestling fan, and I cannot see us doing business with Dixie Carter in any form whatsoever. So it seems like Dixie Carter not only burned her bridge with Spike TV, but as it looks right now with Destination America.
The only thing that surprises me about any of what you just said is that it took so long to get to this point. Really, I mean, it's farcical what has happened with TNA, and people look down at the. I think the WCW meltdown is maybe the only failure in wrestling history that's more catastrophic and grander scale than the TNA failure. It really is. It disgusts me, that there's so much great talent that they could have done so much with and been a really viable alternative to WWE. And they've it's been a lady who doesn't know the wrestling business and doesn't know what she's doing, insisting on calling the shots and insisting on bringing in whoever says the prettiest words in her ear at that particular moment. And this is what you get when that happens, when the wrong people are steering the ship. So I would love to see a complete overhaul and a drastic rebranding. And yeah, I want to see TNA become GFW.
Now on the WWE front, Brock Lesnar is finally back, which is exciting stuff. But my excitement kind of waned. I don't know if you got a chance to catch Raw or at least see what happened on Raw. But Brock Lesnar, in a span of 3 hours, became mortal.
Yep.
He took a chokeslam or two from Kane. He was beaten up by Seth Rollins, and with all due respect to Seth Rollins, but he's been booked like a complete bitch the last 6 months. And the ending of Raw saw Brock Lesnar down at the hands of Seth Rollins, Kane, and Joey Mercury. Your
Not
thoughts
to mention,
on the... Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Please finish your
I was going to say, your thoughts on the booking of Brock Lesnar, who is now mortal.
Yeah, not to mention that they also had him shaking hands and apologizing to JBL and John Cole, and it just, this is why I want a viable alternative to WWE, because they don't really seem to have any desire whatsoever to build stars, and in fact, there's this concerted effort to shoot themselves in the genitalia every time they seem to get any momentum whatsoever. I mean, look at Kevin Owens and John Cena. They did everything right with Kevin Owens, man. Just turn him into a megastar in record time. And then as soon as he pins John Cena clean 1, 2, 3 and shocks the wrestling world, oh my God, look at this Kevin Owens guy. We all got to pay attention to him. There is this mad, furious rush to get John Cena his win back, because heaven forbid anybody should have any kind of momentum. You got Brock Lesnar running all over the WWE, doing whatever he damn well pleases, and that's a quote, but then apologizing for doing it later. And then getting beaten up by Kane, who, is really not a star on the level that, I don't want to say he's not a star, but he's not on the level that he should be really doing much offensively to Brock Lesnar. It's mind-boggling, and I don't even try to understand the mindset behind it anymore. Aside from, I really do just think this is a kind of insanity that comes with having no viable competition, with nobody keeping you honest. There's so much complacency in WWE right now that even when they do something right, there's this weird urge to do something wrong just because they can get away with doing it. And I don't get it. I don't pretend to, but that's what I expect from WWE at this point. So I'm not the least bit surprised that with Lesnar being this giant monster heel on a scale that Big Van Vader was in the early 90s, and it's a very special kind of heel that you get once in a generation or twice in a generation, that they would deliberately piss in their own pool.
So, with all that being said, how do you see Battleground playing out, especially with Sheamus now, and of all people, being the owner of the Money in the Bank briefcase?
To be honest, man, I don't care. I really don't. I mean, WWE has done everything they can to drive me away from the product, NXT accepted, for a long time. So I'm very selective in what I watch with WWE now. And even having the network, I don't know that I'll be watching the next pay-per-view. I've got the network. It's a good deal. And I will. I'm not saying I'll never watch WWE again, but I go through periods where I deliberately avoid watching WWE after when Daniel Bryan pinned John Cena at SummerSlam, and then they did the swerve to put the belt on Randy Orton immediately. That was one of those times where I got so disgusted and turned off. I didn't watch any WWE programming for months afterward, and I felt the same way after the Kevin Owens loss, and this just cements it. And this is I got this news about Brock Lesnar by skimming the dirt sheets. I didn't get it from watching the programming because I'm turned off again. And I'm not saying they'll never draw me back in, but I'll like I said, I'll be very selective in what I watch, and I have no plans to watch Battleground based on what they've been doing recently.
Bret Hart, the legend, made some controversial comments in a recent interview with Sports Illustrated. Pretty much outright hinted that Daniel Bryan may have post-concussion syndrome, which is just awful. And then he turned his criticism towards Samoa Joe, who's a friend of yours, and practically called him reckless for injuring TJ Wilson, a.k.a. Tyson Kidd, who suffered a neck injury with Samoa Joe, in a match with Samoa Joe. And I'm just thinking, Joe's been doing the muscle buster for over a decade now. Mm-hmm. Very rarely has he injured anybody in the ring. As a guy that knows Joe pretty well, can you just kind of give fans that maybe not be as familiar with him kind of an idea of what kind of worker he is and the reputation he's had this last decade?
Samoa Joe, it's an understandable oversight to not know how good Joe is because of how badly he was booked in TNA for a long time. But I really consider him to be one of the best workers on the planet. And he's a guy that spent a lot of years working a stiff style with many times with smaller guys because Joe's bigger than most of his opponents. And yet we don't see this trail of bodies behind him, which you would see if a guy was a reckless worker working a stiff style. I think he's a guy who knows how to take care of his opponents. And I think this was a case of an injury that was going to happen sooner or later. I actually watched, somebody did shoot that particular muscle buster from the stands, and I watched the video footage. And actually, Joe brought him down dead flat on his back in the safest possible fashion. It was a hard hit, but it was a hard hit in the safest way with the safest landing on the softest part of the ring, which indicates to me that this was just one of those things where it's going to happen. I mean, a couple of years ago, Steve Austin completely tore the ligaments in his knee walking because of the accumulated damage in his knee that eventually gave way. And he got surgery, and now his knee's better again. And I'm hearing indications the same thing's going to happen for Tyson Kidd, which is great. But this is a very injurious business. Right now, the current in-ring style lends itself to this type of injury because I think there's way too much emphasis on high spots and not enough emphasis on mat work and storytelling. And this stuff's going to happen. But I don't think there's any way that you can blame this on Joe.
Well said. Now, on the MMA front, at the time we're recording this, we got just a couple weeks from UFC 189, the most highly anticipated fight of the year, the most hyped featherweight fight in UFC history and MMA history, Aldo versus McGregor, but with some controversy. There was a recent interview I saw on MMA Fighting with Andre Pederneiras, who trains Jose Aldo at Nova União, and he mentioned that in Brazil, they diagnosed him with a fractured rib, this being Aldo. In America, they diagnosed him with a bruised rib, and Dana White saying everything's fine. What the hell's going on, Paul?
Yeah, that's a very good question. This opens up all kinds of room for speculation. Is it a case of the American medical facility is being superior to Brazil's? Possible. Is it a case of the doctors being doctors who work with UFC on a regular basis and might be more inclined to protect the UFC's interests? Very possible. Or the truth could be something else entirely. And That's all we can really do is speculate at this point. But if we get conclusive proof that the ribs are fractured, it's not going to look very good on UFC to have come out and said they're just bruised ribs and we're going ahead with the fight, because they have an obvious financial interest here in that this is the biggest fight that's come along in in a long time. I would say the biggest fight since John Jones Daniel Cormier. So they want to protect this fight and they want it to happen. And yeah, if we see specific medical documentation that clearly details cracked ribs, then in the words of Ricky Ricardo, UFC is going to have some explaining to do.
Yeah, and there are rumors that also go around that Conor McGregor had a knee injury and has been training through it. With this, all this news leaking out on both sides, do you think that tarnishes the fight at all, or knowing all the fighters you know, is that just kind of the case with most fights, at least most big fights? Guys just go and hurt.
Everybody's hurt all the time. That's the nature of this business. It's the nature of the sport. Everybody's got injuries all the time. When I first got into the Pancrase organization in 1997, the sport was so new. I barely knew anything about it. And when I saw the extent to which injury was plaguing the Pancrase roster, I mean, their disabled list had 4 or 5 guys on it, and they didn't have a particularly big roster of Japanese fighters, not compared to what UFC has today, certainly. It made me realize this is an insanely punishing sport, and the training takes even a greater toll than the fighting in most cases. And this stuff's going to happen. Everybody's always coming into fights with injuries. It's the nature of the game. And so what do you do about that? Do you have the guys fight less often? But right now the fighters, guys like Conor McGregor seem to have reconciled themselves to the injury. Jose Aldo, by all accounts, still wants to fight. And that's just the case. I don't think you're ever going to watch a UFC where you're watching an athlete who is 100% uninjured.
Yeah, and in the case of Aldo, I mean, far be it from me to criticize one of the greatest fighters of all time's training methods, but I feel like this guy's always suffering some type of injury. I could count on my hand, I think maybe 5-6 times where this dude's been injured, had to delay a fight, or in the case of last year, caused the UFC 176 to get canceled. If you're a guy like Jose Aldo, and I guess to another extent Cain Velasquez, are you at the stage of your career where you have to look in the mirror and say, all right, maybe I got to change something so I can prolong my career?
Well, I've said this before. It's a case of the sport being as young as it is that the training methods are still evolving. Again, going back to my time in Japan, it was an unbelievable opportunity to train there at the time, and I appreciated it for what it was. But a significant part of me was happy when I got to come home because their training methods were so grueling that everybody was shot by the time they were in their early 30s, with very few exceptions. And the sport's evolved since then where guys don't overtrain to that extent anymore. But I think there's still, overtraining is still a problem. And finding out how to train most efficiently and also get the amount of rest that you need when you are pushing your body to these extreme limits, I think that's a balance that still has not been struck in the sport of mixed martial arts. And as fighters and trainers and specialists are going through this process, we're going to have cases like this. And we've had tons of them. We're going to have a lot more where fighters are consistently injured until such a point as the training methods get efficient enough. And also, I think the sport comes to a place where fighters have access to the proper medical facilities. I mean, if a guy gets hurt in the NFL, he's got the absolute best medical care in the history of humanity at his fingertips. He is rushed into every facility that can help him with the most cutting-edge methods to heal him and get him back on the gridiron. Whereas most MMA fighters exist at a very low financial level. These guys are earning blue-collar wages. They can't afford that kind of thing. And the UFC is not placing those facilities at their disposal in most cases. So I'm not saying they don't provide any medical, but not to that extent. So I think that's another big issue too. And I think those things have to be resolved before we're going to see the injury rate drop with any kind of significant degree.
How much pressure does Jose Aldo have right now? Been undefeated for 10 years, undoubtedly one of the greatest fighters of all time, set to make a gigantic payday. I think Chael Sonnen mentioned in his podcast he's set to make around $3.5 million. Even if Aldo is not going to be anywhere near 100%, if you were him, would you still fight, especially after all his complaints about pay?
Very likely. It's he's got to be feeling an insane amount of pressure right now, and he needs this fight too because it's interesting you brought Chael's name up out of everybody because Chael is the guy who took Anderson Silva to a new level. You know, even without Chael in the picture, Anderson Silva, until his drug test situation, was a bigger name after Chael than before Chael. And this is the case with Conor McGregor and Jose Aldo. And it's a similar situation where you got a Brazilian monster who isn't the star on the level that he might otherwise be because of, you know, the fact that he's not entirely fluent in English and maybe charisma is not what it could be and so on and so forth, the number of factors. But then a contender comes along who makes that Brazilian into the megastar that he could be. And this is the case with Conor McGregor, and Aldo needs this fight. You know, and I think that I don't want to say it's a black and white issue. I think there are pros and cons to taking the time he needs to heal, and there are pros and cons to going into the fight now. But if he goes into the fight now, if he wins, he has polished off this challenger who's been antagonizing him for God knows how long. If he loses, there is a giant money mega fight in the waiting. So I think that those things must be on Aldo's mind, and I think if he's able to fight, he's going to. And then, of course, taking business completely out of the equation, this guy is a fighter, and he's had somebody up in his face, somebody grabbing his title belt off of him, somebody doing everything they can to get under his skin. And on the most basic and primal level, I'm sure he is itching to punch Conor McGregor right in his face as soon as humanly possible.
You've been very busy, my friend. You made the announcement on Twitter that you are the Marcus Phoenix in Gears of War. Gears of War Ultimate Edition, correct?
I'm doing all the acting and all the body mechanics, and basically, yeah, they use my body to map and even mapping facial expressions. You know, it's I've gotten a sneak peek at some of the stuff that they've done, some of the stuff you're gonna see in Gears of War Ultimate Edition, and I'm just very impressed with the Gears of War team. The Coalition has done an incredible job on this game, and I think everybody's going to be really happy with it.
Very cool. And for some gamers that may not know your background, obviously you've been an actor, you've been a stuntman for a long time. Did your acting gigs start coming along around the same time as video games? I mean, what came first for you?
Stunts and acting came first, but it wasn't long before I got into video game work. I started working with Electronic Arts around 2002. My first video game was Marvel Nemesis: Rise of the Imperfects, and I did motion capture for most of the heroes in that game and most of the villains in that game. And so it's been kind of cool because I've watched the evolution of video game technology all along the course of my career, and I've done innumerable games. And it really is. It has impressed the hell out of me what they're able to do now, as opposed to what they were able to do when I first got in the industry. And it's also easier on the body. It was much more punishing on the performers. More was demanded of us when the technology was a little bit less, a little bit more primitive. And now they're able to do so much more that we can concentrate more on the acting and the performance, and less. Even though it's still pretty grueling physically a lot of the time, it's less punishing and less grueling than it used to be.
What's a day in the life like of a guy that does motion capturing?
It's tougher than the average stunt day. I mean, stunts is funny in that you've got your average stunt day, you know, can be punishing. It can hurt a bit. Then you get your days where you're absolutely getting brutalized. But in video games, your average day is tougher because you're working a lot more consistently. There's fewer breaks. You're usually just because of the nature of the technology, the floor has to be particularly rigid so that the equipment can pick up your body mechanics properly. So you're usually running on a concrete floor that's got hard plastic matting on top of it, which can drain a lot of the energy out of you quickly. Then you're doing stunts that you would normally do on TV shows and movies and things like that, which are also punishing. So I think you're putting in a lot more work. You're burning a lot more calories, and you're putting in a lot more minutes and hours of work on a video game than you would on the average stunt day. But of course, there's exceptions.
Is it still more or less harder than training with Minoru Suzuki?
No. I would never say anything is harder than training with Minoru Suzuki. I had 30 of the most painful minutes of my life with Minoru Suzuki and learned so much during the course of it. But that people who don't know who Minoru Suzuki is just know this: you want a fair example of what it's like to roll with that gentleman, who is one of the most accomplished catch wrestlers in the world and one of the most sadistic people on the planet. Dive face first into a wood chipper, and you'll get a basic idea.
I know you're a little disenchanted with wrestling right now, but I'm hoping you're watching Ring of Honor wherever you get it in
Yes.
Canada, as well as New Japan with the G1 coming up.
Yes, especially Ring of Honor. I do have to catch up with the New Japan product. I've been lucky enough to be busy with work, so it's my time's kind of limited right now. But I am following NXT and I am following Ring of Honor, and I'm really happy to see Ring of Honor gaining momentum. I mean, I've loved that company for a long time. I haven't always agreed with certain choices they've made with regards to their talent and their booking, but they don't have to answer to me anyway. And I love that company, and I'm glad to see them gaining momentum. I'm glad to see Kyle O'Reilly kicking ass. Recently became a Dalton Castle fan. I freaking love that guy, and it's overall huge ROH fan.
And what I love is the main events almost always have some type of decisive finish. There's no BS. There's no stupid booking. No non-finishes, dusty finishes. It's just there's a winner and there's a loser on almost every show.
Yes, and also the last time I think it was Jay Lethal and Kyle O'Reilly, if I'm not mistaken, where they used the headlock as a story point for about the first 10 or 15 minutes of the match. It was a long match, and they were telling a story, and it was all based around the headlock, one of the most basic and fundamental holds. And it was an entertaining story, and the crowd was popping for it. And I just don't see how I don't want to say spot monkeys because I appreciate people who have physical ability and can do these amazing high spots, but I just don't get how they want to shorten their careers by having that be the only weapon in their arsenal. If you can do Young Bucks style high spots, that's awesome. But you got to be looking down the road toward the days where you can't do those anymore. You have to have a more limited repertoire. Why not learn how to tell a story too? And when guys like Kyle O'Reilly and Jay Lethal, two of the most talented guys on the planet right now, but they just showed everybody how to tell a story with an extremely basic hold that anybody can put on and entertain the crowd in the process. And then they had their high spots as well. So I love that fact is that storytelling isn't necessarily dead. I do think that a lot of Ring of Honor matches are overbooked. I think a lot of the time it's to put it more politely than it usually is. I think there are often some matches are 10 pounds of excrement in a 5-pound bag. But there is so much that Ring of Honor is doing right, and so much that I love about what they're doing with their talent, and that is definitely one of them. Is that you will see matches where storytelling is pushed forward.
Yeah, that's what I love about it. And Jay Lethal unifying the titles, which is just awesome. Had a great match with Briscoe. Finally reached the mountaintop in ROH. Looks like some people are taking Jim Ross's advice of making less mean a little bit more these days in pro wrestling.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm happy to see. Lethal's a guy who's been there for so many years, grew up in the company, and I'm happy to see him wearing the belt. You really do need fresh faces in prominent positions, and if anybody deserves it, it's Lethal, and he's a guy who's been an underrated talent for a long time. I think because charismatically speaking, I think that's where he was slowest to develop, and but he has developed, and he has definitely become a personality who can carry that ROH title and can carry both titles. And it'll be interesting to see because in a lot of these other champion versus champion matches, I mean, with Hulk Hogan Ultimate Warrior, they immediately took the Intercontinental title off of Warrior when he won the world title. And when they had the ROH unification match with Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness to unify the Pure and World titles, then the Pure title disappeared after that match. Whereas in this case, we see the champion expressing an intent to defend both titles. And I can't recall seeing that specific scenario before, where you've got the two biggest titles in the company held by one guy, and he's defending them consistently. So I'm interested to see where they run with this.
Same here, my friend. Now, before we let you go, we know you got a lot going on. Anything you could tell us as far as what you're allowed to talk about?
I'm looking forward to the Gears release, which I believe is in August. I want to thank everybody involved in that. Seriously, guys, the people. Gears of War is an awesome game because it's got an awesome team behind it, and all the other performers that I worked with, and like Jack Felling, the producer, and Kyle Gallen, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, the director, and everybody. I'm leaving out a bunch of names, but it really is a fantastic team and a talented team, and you're going to see that reflected when Gears of War Ultimate Edition comes out. And it has been an absolute honor and a privilege to play the part of Marcus Phoenix. And there is a possibility that When We Were Bouncers at this stage is now in the running for Grant to put together a pilot, teaser pilot for a series pitch. So,
Oh wow, that's awesome.
yeah, I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that one too. We'll see, but I've got a great producing team out aligned with the project now, and we'll see where it goes from there. But if we do get the green light on this, if we are given the subsidy to put the pilot together, then we've got some very prominent individuals. One in particular who's committed to help us with that. And yeah, I don't want to count any chickens, so I'm not going to do too much bragging about it right now. But if we get the green light, Fred, you're going to be the first one I call, and we can talk about it in more detail.
Hell yeah, man. And for those that want to support your excellent book, When We Were Bouncers, you interviewed various celebrities on their experiences as bouncers. I mean, just a ton of different combat sports celebrities. All you got to do is go on Amazon.com, check out When We Were Bouncers, buy the book. It is awesome. A great read, for sure. And you guys are on Twitter too, right? At Famous Bouncers?
At Famous Bouncers, that's correct.
Support When We Were Bouncers, and hey, maybe you can see it in television form in North America and worldwide. Paul, I'm very happy for your success, my friend. Couldn't happen to a better guy. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. At Mauler MMA.
Oh, yeah. At Mauler MMA. Follow him or he'll punch you in the face.
Exactly.
Thanks, man.